Today we are going to read chapters 8 through 12 of Lions of Little Rock. If you have your headphones with you, be sure you have them turned up to the loudest volume to your liking to be sure that you are zoomed in and you're focused on today's read. Now, if you are using your computer without headphones, be sure you have them loud enough that you can hear, but also be sure that you're not distracting your friends next to you to make sure that you are 100% zoned in, but also you're eliminating any chances of being the distraction. Now, we're going to be, like I said, reading chapters 8 through 12. Throughout the time of us reading third grade, I will take pauses because you do have to answer some questions in front of you on that worksheet. Some of these questions, third grade, may be multiple choice or short answer. However, everything that is a question on this worksheet has been provided with answers from our read. So at any point in time you hear the answers during our read of chapters 8 through 12, stop what you're doing, pause the video, and answer those questions. You do have the option to go back whenever you need to do so. However, our goal for today is to finish all the way up to chapter 12. Because when we read today, we're starting right off on chapter 13. So make sure you have everything done. Make sure that completed worksheet is turned into your either yellow or red bucket, because as soon as we finish with our work today and you listen to this video, we're jumping straight into chapter 13. So let's not waste any more time. We're going to get started. Here we go. Chapter 8, A New Friend. The next day at lunch, Liz showed up with the schedule. "I got it all worked out," she said. "We have 3 weeks until our presentation. If we work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after school and Saturday afternoons too, I think we'll be ready. Maybe, I hope." "Why are you two working so hard?" asked Sally when she heard about our plans. "I was wondering the same thing. Judy had told me Miss Taylor was an easy grader. We could probably wait until the weekend before and still get an A." "Marley's going to talk," bragged Liz. "Oh, yeah, that's why we couldn't wait. I kept trying to forget that part. If the bribe had been anything but a magic square math book, it would have been easy to refuse." "Oh, really?" said Sally, as if that was about likely as me jumping off the diving board. I suddenly wanted to do it. Magic squares or no, just to prove her wrong. Liz elbowed me in the ribs. "Tell her," she said. "I am," I squeaked. Sally rolled her eyes. "Ignore her," ordered Liz. Sometimes she could just be as bossy as Sally herself. "Now, we just need a place for you to practice speaking aloud. The library's out, of course. It needs to be somewhere where you feel comfortable, but where we don't have anyone else, like a maid or an older sibling, hanging around. You don't have a treehouse, do you?" I shook my head. Liz thought in silence for a moment. A few tables over, JT shoved a whole orange slice into his mouth. His bang fell into his eyes as he started limping around like a monkey, but somehow still managed to look cute. "The zoo," I suggested. "Perfect," said Liz. "You could talk to the animals." "Great," I thought glumly. "Just call me Dr. Doolittle." We started the next afternoon in front of the gorillas. I watched the mother gorilla pick the bugs off her baby for a good 5 minutes before Liz cleared her throat. "Okay," said Liz. "Now I've prepared a few questions for you to get warmed up." I gave her a look. This was sounding pretty stupid. "Come on, Marley. They're easy. Give it a shot." "Fine." I crossed my arms and stared at her. "What's your favorite color?" "Blue." "Who's your favorite singer?" "Buddy Holly." "I like him too. Did you see him sing Peggy Sue on Ed Sullivan?" I nodded. That had been pretty neat. "What's your favorite subject?" Liz continued. "Math." I knew that. "And what's the point of all this?" "To get you talking," said Liz. I hate to admit it, but her plan had worked. We had just had a whole conversation. The next day we met, we moved on to the elephants. Liz had read me a part of the notes I have written up. Even though Ruth, the elephant, was the only one listening, my hands were still trembling. "The Quapaw families had a lot of traditions," I mumbled. "The Quapaw?" Ruth stomped her foot. "Go on," coaxed Liz. "Fathers were really important to the Quapaw." Stomp. I paused again. "Quapaw, Quapaw," says Liz. Stomp, stomp. Why is the elephant? Liz shrugged. Quaw, 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 quaw. I said. Ruth stomped her feet so fast, it looked like she was dancing. Liz and I glanced at each other and burst out laughing. It was fun after that, singing to the seals and hollering to the herons. Liz always helped me warm up like an opera singer by asking me a few silly questions. Would you rather be a hippo or a rhino? Rhino. If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? Peanut butter. It's the night of the big dance. You're there with JT and I don't like him, I said. You give him his homework every morning, Liz pointed out. Okay, so I did. It's the night of the dance, Liz went on. Would you rather have a pimple on your chin or your forehead? Forehead, of course, I said. I could wear my hair down and hide it. Great, said Liz. Now it's your turn. My turn to what? Ask me questions. Actually, I wanted to. We've been meeting for 2 weeks now, and she knew all the sorts of random facts about me. I knew next to nothing about her, except that she was bossy and organized, and actually kind of fun. But when I tried to think of something witty or funny to ask, my mind went blank. What's your favorite color? I said finally. Green, said Liz, like the grass. Who's your favorite singer? Elvis Presley. What's your favorite subject? English, said Liz, but my mother wishes it was math. Interesting. Part of me wanted to follow up there, but there was something else I was dying to know. Why are you helping me? Because I like to see Ruth dance when you say quapaw. This was hard for me. I've always told her the truth, and she was turning it into a joke. Seriously. For the first time, Liz was silent. Behind her, the giraffes chewed their cud. I thought it might be hard always being quiet, Liz said finally. I thought you needed a friend. She was right. I did. I needed a friend too, said Liz. And suddenly, I knew what Liz was. A cup of warm milk with a dash of cinnamon. We stuck to the assignment for the rest of the afternoon, walking past the zebras and the flamingos, and finally ended up at my favorite place, in front of the lions. There were 2 lions out that day, both females, playing together, jumping over a log, batting an old pumpkin with their paws. I've never seen them so active. We watched them for a long time. Sometimes I feel sorry for them, Liz said suddenly. Why? I asked. They look like they're having a great time. Yeah, she said. And I know they get their food and everything, and if they get sick, a vet comes and gives them medicine. But don't you think they'd rather be chasing zebra across the savannah? Probably, I agreed. I like to listen to them, Liz said. What? At night, I like to listen to the lions roar. Me too. I never thought anyone else did. I wondered where she lived. I wondered if she ever invited me to her house. Should I invite her to mine? Wasn't that what friends did? When we first moved here, the roaring used to scare me. But now, I find it comforting, I suggested. Yeah, she agreed. And for the first time, I understood what Judy was saying about finding someone who shares interests with you. Someone you can sit quietly with. For the first time, I thought I might understand what it was like to have a friend. Chapter 9, The Football Game. By mid-September, the Supreme Court had just decided that integration in Little Rock should proceed, but the school still didn't open. For a while, it seemed that with the high schools closed, there'd be no football too. But the public outcry was so great, the governor called the superintendent and told him to start up the football program again. School or no school. Daddy nearly turned purple when he heard the news. They let their kids go without an education, but Little Rock won't stand no football? Mother shrugged. She and Judy weren't fans, so they didn't seem to care either way. It was certainly strange that football seemed more important than school. But I was glad they finally decided to continue the football program. Friday night football games were something Daddy, David, and I had always done together. Even though he was upset, Daddy called David and asked if he wanted to go to the first game with us. Daddy was actually just down the road. David was actually just down the road at Little Rock University, but he was living in one of those dorms. Mother thought it was a waste of money when he could have stayed at home, but Daddy had had so much fun when he was in college, he wanted his son to have the same experience. David was busy, having fun, I guess, so I asked Liz to join us. She was going to meet us at the game, and I was so excited I couldn't help bouncing up and down on the front seat. Elvis' Jailhouse Rock came on the radio, and Daddy winked at me and turned it up louder. Mother was always telling us to turn the music down. Liz was waiting for us by the gate. She yelled, "Marley!" when she seen me and ran to give me a hug. "Hi, Liz," I said and grinned. Daddy held out his hand for Liz to shake. You must be the history partner," he said. She shook his hand and shook it hard. "You must be the English teacher." Daddy laughed. "Did Marley tell you she's going to talk in front of the whole class?" Liz asked. Daddy glanced at me. "No, she didn't." "Liz," I hissed. "You have to tell people," she said. "That way you can't back out." Daddy laughed again. "When Marley's ready to tell me, I'm sure she will," said Daddy. "Now, who wants something to eat?" Daddy brought us popcorn and hot dogs for dinner. We gobbled them down and went to find seats in the bleachers. Every time one of those Central players made a good play, we screamed and waved homemade tissue paper pom-poms in the air. Daddy laughed and went off to talk to a colleague from work. JT was sitting a few rows in front of us. He was wearing Little Rock Tigers varsity jacket, probably Reds, and Tufts. His blonde hair was sticking up as if he'd forgotten to comb it. I had an overwhelming urge to go and slick it back down. "Staring at the back of his neck isn't going to make him turn around and say hello," Liz said finally. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on," Liz said, laughing. "This is the perfect opportunity." "The perfect opportunity for what?" "Well, you just can't talk to animals forever. We're giving a presentation to our class, which is made up of people." I didn't like where this was going. "And JT is in our class." Before I can protest, Liz pulled me up and practically pushed me down off the bleachers. "Go talk to him." I glanced at her. She grinned and gave me a thumbs up. Maybe I could do this. All I had to do was say hello. I took one step forward, then another. I was wearing my cream sweater and the pleated skirt, which was really cute, but I kicked over someone's Coke bottle, leaned over to try to catch it before the glass broke, slipped, and almost fell head first down the bleachers, and only managed to save myself by grabbing onto JT's jacket, in which I pulled halfway off his shoulders before I finally landed at his feet. "Oh, hi, Marley," JT said, like girls threw themselves at him every day of the week. Who was I kidding? They probably did. "Enjoying the game?" I nodded and struggled to my feet. "Sit down," JT said. A big burly girl with slick back hair moved to make room for me. He was wearing a t-shirt and a leather jacket, and I didn't know him from school. He was probably one of Red's friends, and he smelled funny, like a warm beer. I sat down between them. I was so nervous. All I could think of was the smear of ketchup on my cream sweater. It must have happened when I fell. At least Red was playing in the game, so I didn't have to sit next to him. "I'm really glad you stopped by," JT said. "I wanted to ask you something." Finally, after all those math problems, he was going to ask me on a real date. "What?" I said. I said, looking up at him expectantly. It was the first time I have ever spoken to him. I thought about batting my eyelashes, but he probably just think I had popcorn or something in my eye. "It's about the homework," said JT. "The homework. Okay. Maybe he really wanted me to tutor him. I could live with that. Liz would say it was good speaking practice and you're getting all the problems right. Well, of course I am. I thought that was the point. You can't do that. See, if I'm getting all right on my homework, but I don't do well on tests, Mr. Harding is going to get suspicious. I need you to throw a couple of wrong answers here and there. Get more wrong? He could just do the homework himself if he wants to get more wrong. Do you like the movies, Marley? He looked at me with big, smoky blue eyes. I nodded. I do too, JT said, but Mother won't let me go unless I keep my grades up. If I helped him, maybe someday he would ask me to come along. So, what do you say, JT cooed? Will you help me out? I nodded again. Great, he said and grinned. See you on Monday. I smiled, stood up practically, and ran back to my seat. At least I didn't trip on anything else this time. Liz patted me on the back when I returned. There you go, you did it, she cheered. Liz, I said. All I said was, what? That's something. And I nearly fell into his lap. Yes, she said, but you did it gracefully. We both started to laugh, harder and harder, until my stomach started to hurt, and Liz wiped tears from her eyes. You two sound like a pack of hyenas, said Sally. She was walking up the bleachers with her mother behind her. Who are your friends? Mrs. McDaniel asked. You know Marley, said Sally. Yes, of course. And this is Liz. She's new at school. Liz, this is my mom. Sally waved at her introduction. Hi, said Liz. Sally's mother gazed at Liz intently for a moment. I've heard a lot about you, Elizabeth. Liz blushed. Sally's been real welcoming to me. Glad to hear it. A woman in a large white hat sitting a few rows behind us waved in our direction. Well, it was nice to meet you, said Mrs. McDaniel. She headed up the bleachers, but Sally sat down with us. What did you tell your mother about me? Asked Liz. I knew her well enough to know now to hear the annoyance in her voice. Nothing but the truth, said Sally. She flipped her hair, then smoothed it down. Does my hair look okay? In a minute, I'm going to talk to JT. Oh, said Liz casually. Marley already did that. Sally turned as red as ketchup on my sweater, and I had to force myself to not start laughing again. It was dark when we drove home. You know, Daddy said quietly, I like that Liz girl. Me too. Are you? He paused. Are you really going to talk during the presentation? I think so, I said. Daddy patted me on the shoulder, and when I glanced at him, I could see the pride in his eyes. So third grade, really quick, we're going to take a pause right here. I want you to take the time to answer those few questions about chapters 8 and 9. So go ahead, whenever you're ready, click that pause button on the video. That way you can answer those questions about chapters 8 and 9. Remember, if you need to, you can always go back to any section to help you understand what was read, but also to make sure you get the questions right. So you can definitely go back. When you're ready, click that on pause button and press play so we can continue reading chapters 10 through 12. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and click that pause button. Here we go, chapter 10, Behind the Grin. Mother and Daddy started arguing again on Sunday. Mother was frying hamburgers on the stove when she said to Daddy, States do have rights, you know. Those politicians in Washington can't be telling us how to run our schools. Daddy bit his lip. He was grating carrots so briskly, I was afraid we would find fingers in the salad. The schools have already been closed for almost 2 weeks. The students are the ones who are suffering. If the governor gives in, what's next? Mother asked. Negroes in our swimming pools? Daddy shrugged. They're already sitting at the front of the bus, and you still managed to find a seat. Richard! It's not right to keep the schools closed, Maureen, and you know it. At that moment, the back door flew open, and David burst in. I squealed, dropped the bowl of potatoes I was mashing. You came home. Hi, Marley, said David, and he gave me such a big hug. He picked me up off the ground. David always wore a dazzling smile, which transformed him from a nice-looking guy into a movie star. Class is going well? Asked Daddy. Never better, said David, but his eye twitched, just like Daddy did when he was lying. He popped a tomato from the salad into his mouth. Where's Judy? Hi, David, said Judy, coming into the room. Hey, sis, David grinned. Wanted to tell you the university is going to offer correspondence classes to all the kids without school. He took a spoon and swiped a bit of mashed potato. Needs more salt, he told me. Then to Judy, thought you might be interested. Correspondence classes? Asked Judy. Yeah, said David. They give you a list of assignments and you send your work in. The professor grades them and sends you a test and you send it back. And who's going to help me if I don't understand a thing? Asked Judy. I can help you, sweetie, said Mother. Yeah, if it's history or English, said Judy. But what if it's chemistry? If it's chemistry, I'm sure one of my colleagues in the science department will be glad to help you. In fact, maybe we could organize study groups for you and Margaret, at least until... And Marley can help you with the math, David teased. Wonderful, said Judy, as she carried the place into the dining room. I'll get to be tutored by my mother and my little sister. Daddy laughed. It was a great dinner, even if the burgers were dry and the potatoes were salty, and salad didn't have any tomatoes because David swiped them all. The whole family was together for an hour. That was enough. After dinner, I pulled David into my room. So, how is it really going? What? Your classes. Oh, great. David picked a piece of lint off his sweater. Come on, David. What? I could tell you're lying. He looked around, though there was no one else in the room but us. Then he sighed and sat down on the bed. Promise you won't tell Mother or Daddy. Of course not. It's awful. All those math classes I signed up for, well, I don't have the foggiest idea what's going on. The professor's talking in a lecture hall, and it's like he's speaking another language. That sounded awful. David has never been naturally as good as math as me. I'm not bragging, it's just a fact. But we had so much fun talking about all the things we were going to invent together. He said he's the one who explained what an engineer was and how they built things, like spaceships and satellites. David shook his head. If you were there, I bet you understand. Me? I asked. No way. Yeah, Marley, I think you would. Then we heard Daddy calling, and David stood up. Bye, sis, he said. It's up to you now to beat those Soviets. He passed with his usual grin back on. Now remember, not another word to Mother. I nodded. That night, I lay in bed wondering how many other times David had grinned and fooled me too, even though he felt awful inside. The idea that my big brother sometimes felt not good enough was strange and a bit scary. But the idea that he thought I'd be able to do those math classes, maybe work a few spaceships someday, well, that made me feel awful good. Chapter 11, The Talisman. Pretty soon, it was the last weekend of September, the last weekend before our presentation. There was an election going on Saturday, and both Mother and Daddy were in a bad mood. I think the grown-ups were trying to decide if they should keep the high schools closed or open them again. But, of course, they didn't say it in that way. No, it was more like, do you think it's a good idea for whites and Negroes to go to school together? That was kind of tricky, if you ask me. There aren't too many people in Little Rock who say yes to that kind of question. Mother and Daddy voted first thing in the morning, even before we cleaned the house. They didn't say how they voted, and I didn't ask. But I thought about it. I tried to imagine what it would be like to go into school with Betty Jean, since she was the only colored person I ever talked to. If you call drinking a glass of tea a conversation. I tried to picture Betty Jean as a 12-year-old girl, but I kept imagining a smaller version of her in a big flowered apron. That made me giggle as I vacuumed my room. Soon as I was done cleaning, I ran out the house to meet Liz at the zoo. We were going over our presentation one more time. I've done my part at least twice for every animal in the zoo. I say my lines in front of the mirror at home, trying to maintain eye contact with myself. I even said my part for Judy, late at night, when Mother and Daddy were asleep. I've done everything I could to prepare. I knew my lines perfectly, and I was still terrified. Liz was late. I watched the lines, but they were just lying there sleeping. I got more nervous every second I stood there alone, so I thought about all the ways Liz had taught me to relax. 1. Take a deep breath. 2. Imagine all the people at school in their underwear. This didn't work too well. Just thinking about JT and his underwear made my heart beat way too fast. 3. My good old friends, the prime numbers. I actually told Liz about them, and she hadn't laughed. I reached 83 by the time Liz finally appeared. She was clutching a paper bag. Sorry I'm late, she said. I've got a surprise for you. What? She reached in the bag and pulled out 2 small green turtles. Their claws scrabbled gently on her hand. I got them at the variety store, she said. Let's have a race. Liz, I said, we have to practice. Liz waved a hand in the air. Marley, there's one more rule of giving a presentation I haven't taught you yet. What? I should have brought a pencil to write it down. You have to know when you're done. But I'm not done, I said. You know your part cold, said Liz. Heck, I bet you can even know mine too. I shook my head. Let's go over it a few more times. Marley, at some point, you're just going to have to believe that you can do it. Well, I don't. Liz sighed. She was getting frustrated. This wasn't going to work. Any minute now, she had to give up and she'll do all the talking after all. And I'd be incredibly relieved and incredibly disappointed. That's what Sally would have done. But Liz wasn't Sally. Instead of giving up, she started looking around like she lost something on the ground. What are you doing? I asked. Looking for a talisman. A what? A talisman. A good luck charm. Like she's going to find a gold amulet or a magic ring lying around on the ground amidst popcorn and peanut shells. But after a few moments, she said, aha, and picked up a single black crow feather. You've seen Dumbo, right? Asked Liz. I nodded. I've seen the movie a bunch of times when I was little. I could relate to the little elephant with the big ears. He didn't talk either. Well, this is the magic feather. Put it in your pocket, and if you get nervous during the presentation, just touch it, and you'll be fine. A magic feather? Yeah, said Liz. That's kind of silly. Just try it. Fine. I held up my hand. Liz placed the feather carefully on my palm. It weighed nothing, just a wisp of air. The feather tickled my hand, but for as far as making me less nervous, nope, it didn't do a thing. Better? Liz asked. I nodded. I didn't have the heart to tell her no. Good. Liz pulled out a small bottle from her pocket because I bought nail polish so we could paint our names on the back of the turtles. That way, you know for sure that it was mine when it wins. So, instead of working, we painted our names on the backs of the tiny turtles and let them run up and down our arms as we waited for the polish to dry. Then, we raced our turtles across one of the largest stones that made up the lion's den. My turtle won. Least we know for sure it was mine, I said, and Liz laughed. It was getting late, so we walked down to the ducks and let the turtles go. They slid silently into the murky green water and paddled away. That was really fun, I said. At least it had taken my mind off the presentation for a little while. You'll be fine, said Liz. I'll bring the magic square book with me to school on Monday. I'm still not sure I can do it, I admitted. I believe in you, said Liz. Thanks, I whispered. She put her arm in mine as we turned to go home. So third grade, we're going to pause right there. Take a few seconds to look and review at the questions for chapters 10 through 11. Whenever you need to, you can pause the video. You can go back and rewind the video to review chapters 10 through 11 as well. You only have a few questions to answer, so go ahead and pause this. Take the time to answer these questions because we're going to wrap up with chapter 12. Here we go. Chapter 12. Blood like a jewel. All Saturday evening and through half of Sunday, I got more and more nervous. I started pacing through the house, clutching my note cards. The third time through the living room, Judy caught my arm. Your presentation's tomorrow, isn't it? I could only nod. I lost my voice. How was I going to find it again? Come on, said Judy. Let's go to the rock crusher. Though we lived in the city, our house was one of the fewer neighborhoods. There were still patches of underdeveloped land only a few blocks from our house. The rock crusher was an old abandoned quarry. The open mine sometimes filled with rainwater, making a small pond, but mostly it was just hills and trees and lots of rocks. David and Judy and I used to take picnics to the rock crusher, but I hadn't been there in ages. The pond was too shallow for swimming, so mainly it was a place for little kids to run around and collect rocks during the day. At night, sometimes teenagers would park on dates or sneak off to drink beer. Mostly, though, there was no one around and the woods were calm and peaceful. Okay, I said. I could practice there as well at home. I started to gather up note cards. Margaret said the old man who lives next to the rock crusher just got a horse, said Judy. She plucked the cards out of my hands and handed me 2 apples instead. The days were hot, so we walked slowly. Judy chattered on about the classes she had started broadcasting on TV for all the high school students. 11th grade was on Channel 11, 7 a.m., history, 7:30, algebra, 8 a.m., English, and so on. I knew she was going on and on to try to distract me from worrying, and even though I could see right through her, it kind of worked. When the classes first started, were they scary? Said Judy. I kept thinking I was going to miss something and wouldn't be able to ask the teacher to repeat herself. Turns out they keep it really basic, and it's pretty easy for me to follow along. I actually like the classes now. It seems familiar, a way to get to go to school after all. Like the lions, I said softly. What? Asked Judy. Like how the lions roar at night, I said. You'd think it'd be scary, but I heard them for so long, it actually makes me feel safe. You're right, Judy said finally. It's like the lions. We walked in silence for a moment. I felt for a black feather. Even though it didn't work, I still had it in my skirt pocket. It was a gift from Liz. JT had only given me his math book, and I already have one of those. Judy, I asked, you ever had a crush on anyone at your school? I mean, last year when you got to go. Yeah, she answered slowly. Who? She shook her head. I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell you who I like if you tell me, I said. Fine, said Judy. Who do you like? JT, I admitted. I try not to blush, but I think I did, just a little. Red's little brother? Judy asked. I nodded. Judy laughed. It was good nature. I pouted. What? He's not the brightest. I shrugged. Awful cute, though. I waited for her to tell me who she liked, but before she could, a group of teenagers in the cars pulled up in front of us at a red light. They were all honking their horns and yelling, and one boy even waved at my sister. Who's that? I asked. Some stupid kids from our school, said Judy. They got nothing better to do. Most of the cars had signs on their windows. High school students against integration, support Fabius, Christianity, not communism. One girl leaned out the window and yelled at us. 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. Then the light turned green and they drove off. Do all students at Central feel that way? I asked. Judy shook her head. only the loud ones. She didn't say anything else. Pretty soon, we came to an open lot with a barbed wire fence. In the middle of the field, there was a gray horse. We crawled carefully under the wire and fed the horse the apples. I scratched her nose, and she looked at me with wide eyes as brown as Judy's and Liz's. I stuck my hand in my pocket again, and this time when I touched the feather, I felt my fingers tingle. A surge of bravery swept over me, but I didn't trust it. I had to do something scary to test the feather, to see if it was really magic. I'm going to ride the horse, I said. Judy shook her head. Come on, I said. Just give me a lift. Judy held out her hands and I stepped onto them. She lifted me onto the horse's back. The mare was very tame and stood still as I tried to arrange myself. I rented a horse once or twice before at the Girl Scout camp, but of course I had a saddle then. I sat straight up and grabbed her mane just like they did in the movies. The horse turned her head back to look at me, then continued to chew the last apple core. I gave her a little kick, but I guess it was harder than I planned because the horse took off fast. I had to wrap my arms around her neck just to stay on. I could feel the horse's muscles moving under her skin. It was scary at first, but thrilling too. And pretty soon, I was imagining I was a cowgirl riding off into the sunset. No, an Indian. I could take the feather from my pocket and put it into my hair and ride forever. The horse stopped when she came to the far end of the pasture. I slid off and rubbed her nose as I waited for Judy to make her way over to us. It was great, I said. You have to ride her too. Before Judy could answer, a man yelled, What are you kids doing with my horse? We looked up. In the next field, there was an old man in worn old coveralls clutching his shotgun. Get out of here, he yelled. Now. We turned and ran, scrambling under the fence. Judy and I headed into the old quarry. After a moment, I realized I had cut my thumb on a barbed wire and stopped, shocked. It hurt a lot, and I started to cry. Judy stopped too and made me sit down on a large boulder. She took one look at my hand, then pulled out a handkerchief and wrapped it around and around, holding it tight. I kept sobbing. His name is Robert Lawrence, Judy said quietly. He's really smart and not that cute, but I like him anyway. I stopped crying, and we sat there in silence. My sister pressed her handkerchief into my thumb. I would have a scar, but I didn't care. One final drop of blood oozed out and sat on my fingertips, like a jewel, a secret given to me by my sister. So, Catamounts and Sooners, we're going to stop there. So right now we've read chapters 8 through 12. If you haven't answered any questions just yet, make sure you go back and re-listen to any of the chapters, any of the sections that are read. Every question on this worksheet will definitely be in this reading that I read today. So make sure you are really taking the time. You're going back and answering those questions. When you're finished, turning in to the red or yellow bucket and listen for my next instructions. If not, the instructions are going to be posted on the board.